In the week bygone, the White House released two crucial documents: a 33-page National Security Strategy, the NSS, and a 3,000-page National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. Now, first one literally took the world by storm by its iteration of a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which amounts to basically US relegating itself to the Western Hemisphere. But the second one did quite the reverse. It reinstated the status quo on US's strategic role in the world. Now, taken together, these two documents reveal the deepening dissonance at the heart of American foreign policy under Donald Trump, which is not really good news. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the first document, which is the National Security Strategy under Trump, which immediately captured global attention. It triggered consternation among Europeans and sparked alarm across policy circles. Unsurprisingly, it earned praise from the Kremlin about a desired strategic rebalancing with Russia, of course, at the cost of Ukraine. So much has already been said about this polemical document: its populist flourishes, its disdain towards traditional partners, and its theatrical utterances, that anything more would be tedious repetition. All I will reiterate for now is a line from Professor Walter Russell Mead, who's a well-known geopolitics scholar, which he recently offered in response to my question on the worldview on how to make sense of Donald Trump. To which he answered, drama is central to Trump's method. And that is precisely today my focus is not going to be the NSS. Rather, it is the second document, the NDAA, released just after a day, that deserves more attention and analysis. And you know why? Because it lays out every detail of US defense spending and strategic priorities for the coming financial year. The NDAA is important because it tells us where the US money is going, and the NDAA and the NSS do not merely differ, they present fundamentally divergent and inconsonant worldviews. So, once more, what makes the NDAA so important? Before analyzing this divergence between rhetoric and reality, between an America First retraction and the ongoing insistence of America's commitments abroad, it is worth clarifying what the NDAA really is and where it stands in the US legislative process. You know, the NDAA, or the National Defense Authorization Act, is one of the most durable legislative instruments in the American system. It provides authorization of appropriations for the Department of Defense, nuclear weapons programs of the Department of Energy, and other defense-related activities. In addition to serving as an authorization of appropriations, the NDAA establishes defense policies and restrictions and addresses organizational administrative matters related to the duty. Now, a bit of trivia for you. You know, the NDAA has passed every year since 1961, making it one of the few major bills that reliably becomes law. This year's version, already approved by the Republican-controlled House on 10th of December, authorizes a record of $901 billion in annual military spending. It was passed by a vote of 312 versus 112 and will now move to the Senate, which is expected to pass it next week. Trump, too, has confirmed that he will sign it when it reaches his desk. Notably, the total funding Congress approved is actually $8 billion more than the Trump administration had requested earlier in May. Now, for a government which is often criticized for gridlock, which means impasse, the NDAA remains an example of bipartisan continuity. Although bipartisan today, and especially in the American context, has come to mean supported by Republicans who are not part of the MAGA faction. Indeed, if the NSS is the distillate of Trump's raw ideological impulses, the NDAA reflects Congress's institutional pushback against those impulses. It exemplifies the system of checks and balances so deeply embedded in the US Constitution, one designed precisely to restrain absolute tendencies by distributing power across three pillars: the President, the Congress, and the Senate. Now, while the NSS bears the indelible stain of the MAGA worldview, the broader Republican Party is far from aligned with Trump's most ideological advisors. Now, for instance, J.D. Vance's call for freeloader Europe to fend for itself may resonate within Trump's inner circle, But it is not a view which is embraced in toto by the rest of the GOP. And GOP here stands for the Grand Old Party or the Republicans. Now, this current NDAA is negotiated as a compromise between the House and the Senate versions, which were drafted earlier this year. So, in its current form, the NDAA reflects this more traditional Republican posture that prefers a larger continuity in the US strategic posture and role, even though it accommodates other preferences by Trump. Now, when I started out, I told you that the NSS and the NDAA have major dissonance. So, let's understand these differences a little better. The details of the NDAA make the contrast with the NSS particularly striking. While the NSS speaks of retrenchment, which means of shrinking America's role in pushing allies to assume more responsibility, the NDAA does quite the opposite. Now, for instance, on Ukraine and Europe, it allocates $400 million in military assistance to Ukraine in each of the next 2 years, which means in 2026 and 2027. It constrains stopping the sale of military equipment or intelligence to Ukraine and includes a host of measures reinforcing the US commitments to European defense. It places explicit limits on the president's ability to reduce American troop levels in Europe. Now, contrast this with the statements that emerged recently, not just from Trump, but also from his son, Trump Jr., at the Doha Forum, where he announced that American voters have no appetite for supporting Ukraine. Now, this is a statement which is more reflective of the MAGA view, not American people per se. And you know what? Actually, data tells a different story as well. The latest Reagan National Defense Survey, released the same day the NSS was unveiled, finds that 62% of Americans want Ukraine to prevail over Russia. Majorities of both Republicans as well as Democrats support continued aid to Kyiv. The survey's publication, coinciding with the administration's security posture, shows the same dissonance. And this, by the way, is merely one example of the gap between the MAGA stand on American withdrawal and the broader American consensus about the country's global strategic positioning. Further, the NDAA mandates monitoring of China Russia military convergence across technical domains and the impact of a long standing Ukraine war on Russia's defense capabilities, with no mention of a strategic rebalancing like the NSS does. The contradictions between NSS, NDAA, and Trump's immediate decisions are even more sharper regarding China. The NSS repeatedly singles out Beijing. It calls for rectified trade in non sensitive sectors. And yet, on the very day the NSS was released, Trump approved the sale of NVIDIA's more advanced H200 chips to China at a 25% cut to the United States. Now, experts noted that this would significantly boost China's AI capabilities. One think tank's report warned that America's advantage in AI computation, which is currently estimated to be roughly tenfold, could shrink to fivefold if such exports were to continue. Many other experts were quick to claim that Trump's decision negates the biggest US advantage over China in AI, calling it a strategic mistake. Once again, the gap between ideological rhetoric and practical action is too large to ignore. Now, the dissonance continues in the Indo Pacific. While the NSS adopts a half hearted, a half baked tone, suggesting that allies should take on more responsibility, the NDAA's Section 1254 mandates a strategy to strengthen multilateral defense cooperation in the region. Once again, it restricts reducing US troop presence in South Korea below 28,500 without congressional approval. And this is a mechanism which is quite similar for protections for Europe. It includes measures to bolster the US Taiwan and US Philippines cooperation. India, again, appears in discussions on civil nuclear cooperation, on strengthening cooperation within the Quad framework, on geopolitical implications of BRICS groupings, undermining US interests, and also in Russia India collaboration in the defense sector. So, anyway, what is the key takeaway of what I'm trying to tell you? The above mentioned examples show that American foreign policy under Donald Trump cannot really be read at face value. Now, from New Delhi's perspective, a rapprochement between US and Russia remains the most desired outcome, but the path to that remains complex. The cacophony of conflicting voices, the MAGA faction's radical worldview, the broader Republican establishment's traditional security instincts, and Congress's bipartisan pragmatism, all this creates an environment of fundamental dissonance. The NSS may articulate the administration's ideological fantasy, but the NDAA reveals the governing reality because that's where the money is going. The United States remains a deeply engaged global power, bound not by Trumpian whim, but also by institutional structures, congressional prerogatives, and to a fair degree, to public opinion as well. This dissonance, however, is likely to produce confusion abroad, and that is the problem. It perpetuates the unpredictability that has become the defining feature of Trump's current term. Allies and adversaries alike will struggle to parse which version of the American strategy truly reflects the nation's direction: the dramatic, theatrical proclamations of the NSS or the sober, calibrated measures of the NDAA. Even if drama is central to Trump's method, but policy outcomes are still shaped by factors far more grounded than the whims of his inner circle. So, for now, pragmatism is what continues to guide the country's strategic posture, even as the rhetoric soars in an entirely different direction. The problem, however, is one doesn't know which one would prevail in the longer run. Will Trump and MAGA be the aberration, or will they become slowly the rule? So the key lessons remain the same. America's allies and partners need to double down on their own capabilities and prepare for what is called soft landings in very uncertain geopolitics. So I'll be back to discuss this and more. Stay tuned.